So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Janelle James, Senior Vice President with Ipsos UU. Janelle, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today, and special thank you to our panelists. We're excited to have this conversation on truth, beauty, and justice, AI in 2024, not only because AI is an omnipresent topic today that almost every organization and function is trying to figure out, but also because it's our first Innovation, Inclusion, and Insights Roundtable of 2024, and our 12th so far. It's truly a privilege to bring you these dynamic conversations with executives across industries who are leading the way. There's no end to the ways in which AI can touch our businesses, innovations, and even our lives. And today's conversation will focus on many practical applications of AI in B2B and B2C customer journeys. And of course, touching on ethics and inclusive AI development since it's Black History Month. So let's get started and meet our panel. I always love for our panelists to introduce themselves. And so Lynn, can you get us started by telling us a little bit about your role or career journey, how your work touches AI, and give us a brief example of an AI work stream that you've touched.
Hi, thanks, and happy to be here. So I am a user researcher at Microsoft working in the AI platform team. So AI platform is the part of Microsoft that makes the AI that all the other parts use, and also we sell it directly to customers. And for the last year, we've been managing the relationship with OpenAI, so it's been quite the whirlwind time. So my day job is figuring out what our customers are going to want from AI so that we can make it for them. I've developed, my side hustle has become trying to explain AI to smart people who are outside of technology. So I think of all my business school friends, colleagues who are like, I know this is important, but I don't understand it. And so I've sort of taken that on as a little of a passion project. I've got a newsletter on LinkedIn I'll shamelessly promote called Decoding AI. I'd love to have thoughts back from people. Does this make any sense? Because there's a lot there, but the misinformation is really rampant. Again, on my day job, we're really looking at how companies are using AI, which is quite different from how consumers use AI. So we'll talk about that, what may be different than if you're playing around yourself with stuff, how it actually is being used in business.
Wonderful, thank you.
And so you asked us for a nickname. So
no, not yet, not yet with the nickname, but we'll get to that all together. Nayal, you want to go next?
Sure. Nayal Jones. I am the U.S. Head of Consumer Engagement for the Consumer Products Vision at L'Oreal USA. That specifically means that I manage all things brand advocacy, content, as well as influencer management. Also, we act as a center of excellence to help our brands really understand what they should be doing, what they should be testing, and where they can scale into the next big thing. As you can imagine, AI has been a big part of conversations and what we're doing for our day-to-day. And personally, I operate as a futurist. So how are things going to transform the way we do work day to day and the way we interact with consumers day to day? So we are in the very early stages, I would say, of how we're going to be leveraging AI in the way that we interact with our all of our employees as well as our teams and consumers. And we're really thinking about what should we be piloting that's going to help our employees do their job and release some bandwidth so that they can have more time to think, as well as how we can be more personalized and help with our consumers make the better decisions in their journey and enable them to be more empowered in how they interact with our brands and products.
Love that. Thank you. Abizer, you want to take it next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Janelle. Wonderful to be here. My name is Abizer Tapia. I'm a computer engineer by training. Started out in big tech, shifted into healthcare, so medical devices and electronic. That was the first decade was on Fortune 500. The last decade really been growth stage company, very specifically at the intersection of technology, software, data, times hardware and life sciences and healthcare, and seeing the intersection of those two and the outputs you have. A recent project that I've touched actually a number of times throughout the last 10 years has been working with Parkinson's patients, putting wearables on them, taking the data output from that Parkinson's, running them through machine learning models to then really assess that data, understand how are these patients doing outside of the clinic environment.
Love that. Thank you. And last but not least, Ajay.
Hi, Janelle. My name is Ajay Bangia, and I'm with the Ipsos UU team. So I'm part of the qualitative practice at Ipsos, and part of my role has been to scale our existing services and solutions to wider geographies. The last year has been very interesting in the context of AI, and this started off as my evening job, not necessarily my day job, but it's taking a lot more part of what I end up doing in a day's work. And a large part of that has been to try to explore applications of AI in the qualitative research space, specifically in the context of removing friction from our researchers' lives so that they can have a slightly better experience, but also to explore how it could play the role of an exoskeleton for the mind, to help us to do things that we didn't think we could, and perhaps surpass what we thought was originally achievable.
Well, I love having an exoskeleton, so thank you for all your work, Ajay. What I would love for us to do next is actually come up with a nickname. I know that's a little bit creative or weird, depending how you want to think about it, but I would love for each of you to come up with a nickname that will help me and the audience understand your priorities when piloting initiatives that include AI in some point of your customer journey. So if we could get started with Abizer. Do you have anything for us?
Yes. So the nickname I would go with would be Captain Outcome. And really because, especially in the healthcare domain, the use of AI or any technology, frankly, is for the improvement of health outcomes. And really, it doesn't have to be in a dramatic way, but just measuring what part of that journey, whether it be the patient, the clinician, or the clinical researcher, that you can impact and make more.
Love it. Lynn, what's your nickname?
I'm going to go with Morpheus from The Matrix, Lawrence Fishburne. Not that I think that AI is the Matrix, because I don't, but I think his role in just showing people what it really is and letting them make decisions themselves.
Love that. Ajay, you want to give us a nickname?
So I see myself as a curious enthusiast, right? Curious because I'm still trying to figure out how does this work and what could be the potential applications, and enthusiast because it just is so incredibly interesting. So that's how I see myself.
Love it. And last but not least, Nayal, what's your nickname?
So I often go to superhero names, so I had to think about it in those terms. So I said the future proofer, and that's specifically because of thinking about how do I set my teams and my coworkers and my organization up for success. So how do we make sure in what is already proven to be a disruptor, how do we ensure that as an organization and as just experts in what we do, that we're prepared for the future that AI will hold for us.
Love that. So we have the future proofer, the curious enthusiast, Morpheus, and Captain Outcome. With that, I'm curious, there's so much talk about AI now today. What has been most disruptive or influential as you think about AI in customer journeys? Ajay, you want to get us started with that one?
So I'll start off by perhaps sharing a couple of observations from what we've been looking at from internally, and then perhaps share an observation in terms of where I think how it could sort of disrupt customer journeys itself. So if I start to take a look at just our researchers thinking about what they're currently doing and how their day is progressing. What is the experience journey of the individual when they get into work? You start to see AI playing an extremely disruptive role. It's sort of everywhere in terms of how is it helping you to frame your sentence whilst you're writing your email so you don't get fired, or how is it helping you to prepare for your next job itself. And things have been so dramatically different in the last year and a half or so. But I'd also reference perhaps an area where I could foresee a change in the next couple of months or years. So just let's take a look at how the generations are searching for information, right? Individuals of our age, perhaps of a slightly, not Gen Z anymore, would look for information in a search engine. Gen Z starts to look at information on social media. And I'm curious to hypothesize, what happens next? Will they start to take a look at information within a chat interface? Would it summarize a topic of interest for them and provide a specific set of links? Would it color their vision of what the topic is all about? Would it influence them or bias them as they go about the journey seeking information for their next product purchase or any topic that they're currently researching?
Thank you. Lynn, do you have any thoughts on what's been most disruptive or influential?
Well, this year has been eaten by customers who are figuring out how to take their proprietary information bases and then make them, allowing chat to chat over their own data. We call it chat over your own data. So looking at any number of customers who have proprietary information, particularly that is in text at this point, and then how do they make that available? So a large customer who makes software to do your taxes, if you ask a question now, they've had this big database that their own people were using to answer tax questions. Now people can go in and query that directly. It's happening all over the place. So it's really been seeing that if you have data and information that you have curated, that becomes an extremely valuable asset. So it's been interesting to watch that become an asset for customers. But as they've been trying, we've all been working together so that it is, reliable, accurate, what have you, in answering those questions. So in that sense, for their own customers, they're both, in many ways, improving the journey and making it more efficient. So some of the feedback we're getting on these things is they're faster than dealing with a live person, and they're also more accurate and sometimes more respectful and nice to deal with. So that's really been it. We spend just about all of our time thinking about how do you do things over your own data versus dealing with the data, the information that's in the models, right? That's usually a secondary concern because sometimes it's inaccurate. So we try to get away from that.
I love that, both disruptive and influential. Abizer, did you have a thought you wanted to share on that?
Yeah, and maybe like with a little different angle, but kind of piggybacking off Lynn's concept. In healthcare, the unique thing is that, look, there's no plethora of problems to solve, solutions people want to create from a technology perspective. The unique thing is with the process of power of AI there now, healthcare has troves of data that has existed for decades. But let me just bring some to light for folks who might not be in health. You look at electronic medical records, right? If they can anonymize that and have a massive set of data. If you can look at insurance claims, health insurance claims data, you anonymize that, and there's another massive trove of information. Clinical trials that, again, have become in the forefront of everybody's mind with COVID. Again, massive amounts of data. I think 5,000 clinical trials are run per year. So the fact that you now have these data that already had an initial use case in mind, but the fact that you can now leverage these data sets to train models in ways really allows you to expand your creativity as technologists to solve the problem. Now you have the bedrock and the foundation, as Lynn touched on, data to really solve making
Love that. Nail, any thoughts on how it's been disruptive or influential for you?
So honestly, coming from a background in advertising and in beauty where it's so much about the visual, the thought process is how it's disrupting the way in which we'll need to work with creatives and also talent. So you can imagine I was very much watching the SAG-AFTRA strike and listening to what's happening now with conversations around voice actors and when it comes to how they're thinking about moving forward. Because it really does think about, as we're starting to pull together, what do we want to showcase and what we've done in the past, what we may be able to adapt into the future. How do we ensure that we're building the right ethical framework around how we work with those creators and that talent that we originally worked with on the first version of the image? Or the first version of the concept. So I think that's been very key for how that's going to disrupt the conversations we have with others, and how we need to think about the framework around that.
So fascinating to hear all this. I'm curious at like a first pass, any fears or challenges that you're seeing as you're doing any of this work or thinking about piloting any of this work? Leveraging AI?
A lot.
Go for it.
So, it's wonderful, powerful, dangerous. Like say, a hammer can build a house. It can also kill somebody. So we've put in enormous amounts of time into what we call responsible AI, the guardrails, to make sure that it doesn't come back with hurtful, harmful messages. A lot of work going into how to say if it's coming back with accurate information, separate from that. So, I mean, this is front and center in what everybody is thinking about. And, I think what we're seeing in our election is not the only one in 24. There's already been a big one in Taiwan, big one in Pakistan. There's going to be UK. Seeing how it's going to be misused in this election is going to be a masterclass in what can go wrong.
Definitely. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the truth, beauty, and justice framework. And I'm going to just pull it up on screen. So if everyone could just bear with me one moment, if you're able to see my screen. And one of the great things about this framework is that it's been really instrumental in terms of piloting effective AI work streams, both internally in our workplace and as we support clients in the marketplace. It was developed by our head of the head of our global science organization at Ipsos, Rich Timpone, along with Charles Tabor, the provost of Kent State University. And this framework has been effective in evaluating AI work streams, and its utility has even increased as we extend the application across, to current ethical issues and technical domains like synthetic data. So the first part of that is truth, which focuses on accuracy. And then we have beauty, which is about explainability and fertility. And then finally, there's justice, which focuses on equity, fairness, and a slew of other issues that touch on privacy, confidentiality, creators' rights, and the like. I want to spend a little time getting your perspective on this. And I'll stop sharing at the moment, but as we switch gears and think about truth and the core of it being accuracy and the output of AI systems, the question that I have for you is, how does your organization deal with addressing issues in accuracy of models and their output? Particularly with Gen AI, as we think about it, so many are often impressed by the output because it's human-like and authoritative. But oftentimes there are issues. I've personally asked it for citations, and the citations were entirely fabricated. So how do you contend with that? How do your organizations think about that? Ajay, you want to get us started there? Just because I saw you nodding.
Sure. So you're right. I mean, I couple of months back, I did a little bit of a test, and I sort of asked for, okay, name 10 philosophers, right? And most of them that showed up in that list of 10 were from the West, and they were all male. There was no person of color, there was no Asians, there were no women in the list. And so if you keep asking for what about women, it'll give you a list, but then it'll ignore the Asians. So there's bias that exists. If there's bias in society, there's bias that exists in the data that the models are trained on as well. And so our belief has been, perhaps we need to think about it in a manner where the models work best when you've got the human in the loop, right? When you've got a individual who is working along, where you're collaborating rather than delegating to the model. And perhaps you also need to take a look at a different set of use cases itself. So the way that I've been thinking about it is that, well, not all responses that you get from AI would be accurate. Let's go in with that assumption. And if that is your governing assumption itself, then let's take a look at 3 things that you should keep in mind. A, is it easy to check the solution that it produces, or does it come up with even more like complex issues, right? Does it create more problems? Or the second one be, is a partial solution still have value, right? And so if I can't check it, even if I know it's not quite right, does it still hold value for me? And perhaps a set of areas where it influences or it supports creativity of thought. And you could start off with a set of use cases which have greater error tolerance, right? Till the models are fixed, and we start to take a look at new and interesting ways of evaluating its responses and the data that it is using to come up with its responses. Perhaps this would be a good way to start off thinking about it. Is like, is a partial solution good enough? Is the use case relatively error tolerant itself? Is it supporting me in terms of my creativity? And that's how we've been thinking about this particular aspect. And so what comes to mind is pretty much applications which such as using AI to boost creativity or to boost divergent thinking, be it in terms of ideation sessions. Those come to mind very easily. But most importantly, you need to have the human in the loop so that you can try to assess, is this useless or is it truly worth it?
Abizer, I'm thinking about, you as Captain Outcome and what the risks are like in healthcare. Tell me a little bit about how you contend with truth or accuracy when it comes to these systems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to Ajay's point about error tolerance, candidly, in most of healthcare, you don't have error tolerance. The stakes are high. We're talking about human health. We're talking about literally human lives at risk, right? And then let's break it down. So in different areas AI can play. So it could be in new medicines you're discovering. Again, you can't have faulty information, whether it's transforming the way that you're going to provide care, and clinicians are going to provide care, and instructions that you provide to patients, or the way that patients are now going to respond to new types of care. The good thing about medicine and healthcare and life sciences, they already have a framework for this that you can put, which is validation and clinical validation. So nothing just gets accepted. It's very scientific. It's an experiment, right? So, it doesn't even have to be a robust clinical trial. What's the clinical validation? What's been the gold standard to date, right? And oftentimes, for better or for worse, in medicine, the gold standards are decades old, but they're proven. So at least you have a gold standard to test your new data with, and does it hold that truth? If you will, right? Is that data accurately hold? You can run, oftentimes if you come up with a new solution, let's make it real, a new tech solution or AI solution for discovering new medicines or for care, you can actually run clinical studies. It doesn't have to be a full clinical trial. You can do a clinical study to see, does it match the truth that you're expecting. And the gold standard, which is the terminology they use in healthcare, that's already been established. So those are a couple different, I think, entities. And then the last thing is you have governmental bodies that are in place. You have the FDA that is in place. So the FDA is already in place to make sure outside of technology is the truth sufficient. So the unique thing about the FDA in this scenario is they're quite lean forward, believe it or not, for a governmental agency when it comes to technology. And they look and assess, and they're pretty up to date and willing to roll with the technology and AI in many ways, actually much more so than the healthcare industry itself. So they're pretty good at updating their validation models and their standards where AI and technology is going. So that hopefully paints a little bit of a picture of the different kind of bar and validation requirements in healthcare.
I want to move on to beauty, which has two main facets, explainability and fertility. From an explainability standpoint, given the size and complexity of modern AI systems, do you think that we'll just need to accept a degree of a black box nature in their use? How is this talked about in your experience, Lynn? I'm curious how you think about this. Yeah.
I liken this a lot to my car. I actually don't know how my car works, but I know a lot about how my car works, right? I have a lot of experience working a car. I know a lot about the risk. There's also laws, there's regulations. So while I don't literally know how it works, I know a lot about how it works. I think we're at a similar situation with AI in that actually understanding what's inside the models is literally impossible when you're talking about a trillion parameter model. But we have yet to develop the experience working with it to understand how it works and how it goes wrong. One of the most exciting things that some of our folks have been doing is actually figuring out how to use the same model or a different model to go out and check the output of the model. So essentially how to develop the prompts so that it comes back with something and then it goes out and it says, does this something actually exist in the data set? Does it, because for as bad as it is on hallucinating, it's also sort of shameless in that it won't feel embarrassed about having gotten it wrong, right? So if you just set up your prompt so that it goes back out and checks, there's things you can do. We're all learning how to drive this car. It's a very powerful car. That's the way
I love that analogy, particularly because I think it allows everyone, regardless of your level of familiarity or understanding, to feel more comfortable because everyone's driving for the most part, right? The second aspect is fertility in terms of the beauty domain and the ability of AI tools to surprise and inspire with additional richness. I'm curious how well Gen AI is able to do this, if any specific examples come to mind. Anyone want to take this one?
I mean, I can say that, yes. I think in terms of things that you're seeing creatively, had we had this conversation 3 weeks ago, maybe we said, well, there's still some things that, where there, yes, but the hands are still not quite there, so you can tell. And there are still, most models, you can still somewhat tell if it's not a real human. But, with the release of Sora and seeing what the capability can be, I do think we're hitting that point where it's okay. Now we need to have some conversations around what is possible, what's not possible. At the same time, really beginning to think about the tool as Ajay said, as a collaborator versus the creator itself. So if we have creative individuals who, this cuts my time in half, I have a concept that I really want to bring to life, or those who may not have had the skill set to do so, but they are creative in nature, but they're not an artist. They can't draw physically, or they haven't learned to code, so they can't code it in that way. I do think it enables some level of that. within reason, because I still think that there are elements that will always be called into question around the authenticity around it, particularly in certain areas. But I do think that there is a way that it can help you come up with ideas, or help you to bring that idea to life in a concept, to bring something that's a creative concept that's in your head to something to be able to better explain it to someone, or showcase to someone, here's what I think is possible, and what I'd like to see be possible. I definitely think that there's some things to do there.
I love that. One of the things that comes up often with the fertility aspect of the beauty domain is the use of synthetic data to replace or augment human input, and it's growing in a few different ways. I'm very curious about that, particularly its ability to provide the richness of human input or insight, and what potential issues may arise in that regard. Abizer, I'm curious if you can weigh in on that a little bit, given the use of like digital twins in clinical trials. If you could speak a little bit about that and provide a little grounding for the audience, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think synthetic data is a good word, is something that people talk about in healthcare and life science. And then let me try to your point, make ground and make it real. So say you're trying to run a clinical trial, and specific in an area like a rare disease where it's tough to get the participants to enroll in the clinical trial, or like oncology, where you can argue it's ethically, again, if you look at a clinical trial, you have two arms, one who gets the therapy and one who's a control arm who doesn't get the therapy. And normally, if you're an oncology patient or a rare disease patient, the reason you're signing up for the clinical trial is you want to get this new experimental therapy to hopefully save your life. So there's a big ethical dilemma on, is it actually ethical to have a rare disease or oncology patient in that control arm and not receive that therapy? So one of the interesting ways with generative AI that has really evolved is, as you mentioned, digital twin. So what is a digital twin? I'm sure it means many things outside of healthcare. In healthcare is, how do you emulate a person's health and health progression? So let's give me an example. Let's pick ALS, a rare disease. You can now take a look at the last 10 years of ALS clinical trial data, load up your model with that information, and what there are some companies doing out there today, which is pretty fascinating, is when you enroll an ALS clinical trial, you'll have someone who gets the therapy in the variable arm, and then you can actually take that person, run them through the model to emulate what that person would have been like in the control arm. And really now either, and look, you're not at the space right now where you can completely eliminate that control arm. Right now we're at the space where how can you reduce that control arm? So instead of maybe 100 patients or not receiving a therapy, how can you make that 50 patients and still get that same outcome and still have your clinical trial statistically powered to give you a result to say that this ALS therapy works or does not work? And if you can just kind of go 5, 10, 15, 20 years forward, wouldn't it be beautiful to take that same model, because we're not there yet, but even for care, right? So actually have to really project out what someone's health will be like, and project out, if we give them this therapy, this is how they're going to react to it, and this will be their 2, 5, 10, 20-year prognosis versus therapy, B, and really understand, and really to get to that, the beauty and the dream of precision medicine and personalized medicine at a much more real level.
Love that. The last domain for evaluation is justice, and it deals with many aspects of ethics and implications around AI, both specific models and broader societal implications. Bias is one of the most prominent areas discussed, with existing patterns of behavior, viewpoints, etc. I'm curious, what, if any, concerns around bias are top of mind as you incorporate AI into customer journeys, and how do you mitigate them? Lynn, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Well, my point of view is going to be somewhat different in that I am not, and the issues of bias are very real, and I don't want to diminish them at all. that doesn't usually come into point in my work, but a lot of what we are doing actually is accessibility for people. So a lot of the AI technologies, different from large language models doing Gen AI, but a lot of the other AI technologies actually have grown out of accessibility. So there'll be a transcript from this produced automatically. Well, that transcription software was first done for people who are deaf, right? There is similarly text to speech for people who are blind. These things have come along a long way so that people who do have disabilities are able to use the tools that the rest of us take for granted. So in that sense, I think that AI has been tremendously advantageous. Particularly one of the things I'm looking forward to, it's not quite here yet, is the idea of really the universal translator, and that we would all join this same call, but I would join in English and you would join in Hindi and somebody else would join in French, what have you. And we would all could speak what we speak, could hear in our language, and that stops being a barrier between people. So yes, bias is a real issue particularly with the content of the models, which is another reason that we generally don't use the content of the models. We just use the model's ability to speak and use other content. But I view AI as being been a huge boon for people with disabilities. So that's sort of the other side of it.
Love that. Any other thoughts on this one? On bias and contending with that? Or accessibility generally for all groups?
Well, yeah, I completely agree with the point on accessibility, especially when you're doing a B2C, you're in B2C and you're delivering to a consumer. Being able to interact with all consumers is key. And I do believe fully that AI is a huge enabler for us in a way to do that. I do think, coming from an industry that is focused on beauty, there is a lot that we can impact in terms of, when it comes to things like mental health, when it comes to how society sees the concept of beauty and other things. So bias in just what we do day to day and ensuring that we are de-biasing the things that we do is just something that I personally work on and make sure that I'm thinking about in my day-to-day, but also many in the beauty industry think about in terms of how that we can help that. And knowing that most AI models, especially LLMs, if you think about them like children, they have to be taught. And so eventually what you feed into the model is definitely key. And so coming from industries that are making sure that the end outcome is to talk to someone and make sure that you are having a conversation with someone, ensuring that you're building models that allow you to speak equally and ensure that you have the right conversations with everyone, that they see themselves accurately, that you're removing stereotypes and not using that to inform what is the end outcome from the AI that you're leveraging is definitely key. And I think something we always keep in mind as something we should be putting in place and something we should think about when building any closed models, if that were the case, or how we work with open source models. I think making sure that we're thinking about de-biasing from the concept of.
I love to say that the analogies you guys are using are absolutely wonderful. So I have the car and now I have teaching a child. I'm curious, as you think about AI in your various customer journeys, are there any instances where you see AI being a limiting force? And the reason I ask this is, for customers or even employees, and the reason I ask this is because in conducting some research in the streaming area recently, one of the things that came up quite frequently is streaming users trying to get beyond the algorithm and not using the algorithm to search for content. They're literally going to Google and saying, and wanting to just get the full universe of what content is available to them versus being limited to, what the algorithm suggests. Can we talk a little bit about that? Ajay, I see you nodding the most, so I'm going to go to you first. AI is a limiting factor or force. Any thoughts there?
So very interestingly, it sort of comes down to how do you see AI and what is the role that the individual starts to take, right? So do you see it as an exoskeleton to enhance your ability, or do you start to take a back seat and get lazy with it, right? And so when you're delegating all authority to it, when you're delegating your job to it, and you're basically saying, whatever, I'm just gonna, share my homework without putting any thought to it, that's where it tends to get fairly dangerous, because who then is in charge of those particular decisions? That's where you have to be very clear that the catastrophic potential for biases is amplified because the human has checked out of that process.
Got it. Got it. So we don't want a driverless car.
No,
I think what we've learned is that autonomous driving turns out to be a really difficult problem. Like billions of dollars later, still a hard problem.
The next question that I'm curious about is, where do you or your teams or your organizations go for inspiration or education, right? I'm hearing that education, using this as a co-pilot, testing, experimenting, all very important as we figure this out. Where do you guys go for inspiration or education?
All over. I would say I'm also very curious. So I love to read a lot what's happening in the space, happening in news, but making sure I'm coming to things like this and making sure I'm satisfying that curiosity by listening to people who are working in the space or testing and learning different things is really where I get to cut through the noise and really understand what my peers and those who would inspire me are doing in the space.
Any other thoughts on inspiration, education, or even research that you conduct in this area?
Well, I'm in somewhat of a unique position. Just living in ground zero for all this stuff. But I find it amazing to sit in with some of the scientists, research scientists and engineers who are developing these things. I cannot read the academic papers that come out. They reference them. I can look at them. I have no idea what they say. But sometimes listening to them, I can begin to hear, and what I can bring to that conversation is, we could apply, here's a practical application of this. This could be applied in this way, because they're looking at what's possible, and it's crazy that all the things that are possible. And I am coming at it as, that could be applicable here, that could be applicable there. But at the same time, very interested in what thinkers outside of the technology are thinking about the issues of bias, the issues of danger, because they're coming at it with a different perspective. But there's no, everything is sort of shining on this, but it's all being invented right now.
Very true. I want to switch gears a little bit again and do something unique. We have some inclusive design principles, and I want to pressure test them a little bit and understand how applicable they are as you think about developing AI systems. And so these inclusive design principles were pulled together with the help of some DEI practitioners, human behavior experts, AI experts, and there's 6 of them. I don't think we have time to go through all 6, but what I want to do is share one, and I want each of you just to give me a score on how relevant you think it is when you think about your work and how it relates to what you're doing from an AI perspective. And so I'll take your scores, and then after I get each of your scores on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 would be not at all relevant, 5 would be supremely relevant. We're already doing this. After I get your scores, I'll call on 1 or 2 of you just to give me a little bit more perspective on your score. So the first one is, forget the concept of the average user. And that's really based on the fact that we're all evolving and there is no average person, consumer, user, etc. And we should always consider those on the margins. On a scale of 1 to 5, how relevant is this for you? Abizer, just your score.
5.
5. Lynn, score.
5. 5.
Nayal.
5.
No pressure, Ajay, what's your score?
5.
Okay, so you all think this is
That
really
was easy.
relevant. Lynn, tell me a little bit more. Why'd you give this one a 5?
Because we're always are looking at those, at the edge cases, but also particularly at the accessibility, at the hearing impaired, vision impaired, language. You know, we're at more than 150 languages for translation now, trying to reach everybody. Average is not useful.
Yeah, Abizer, same reason, different reason that you gave it a 5?
Similar but different. I mean, in health, if you just think about at first the biology of a human being, every single person is genetically different than any other person in the world. Then you think about trying to treat that person. I mean, lots of look at the medicines that are created today. I mean, the clinical trials that are run to develop the medicines are not even taking the average person. They're a little bit too much average. They're not taking that diversity into to play of what the U.S. what the U.S. census is. So there's a lot of area where average is definitely not sufficient. How do you get more personalized to that individual person? So again, you hear in healthcare, personalized medicine, personalized health. That's the goal as opposed to average.
I love this. Let's do another one. So principle number 4 is disproportionately represent those that are disproportionately impacted, meaning examining the most affected or sometimes most marginalized reveals system failures and genius workarounds. What score would you give this one, Nayal? Just your score. Scale of 1 to 5 on how relevant.
4.
4. Ajay.
5.
Lynn.
3.
Abizer.
5.
5. Abizer, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, you know, just kind of continuing along the thoughts that we were saying before, I was mentioning before, but let's look at that. Let's look at the U.S. and the healthcare system. It's, if you want to look at it from, even we look at it from a health lens, even at the economic lens, the sickest patients are the ones that are burdening the healthcare system the most, and we need our support the most. So therefore, the technologies and solutions, or any solutions, whether it be technology or not, and we're talking about AI-based solutions, need to really focus on those fringe cases, those edge cases, to get them back up to at least equity from an improving health standpoint.
Nayal, you gave it a 4. Give me a little bit of background on why.
It's very similar in that you have those cases of those who are on the margins, and those, especially because the point is that they're proportionately affected by it. So if you're not accounting for that, you're going to, how do you start to think about building the ethics into what you do and making sure you're accounting for no one getting left behind or no one getting harmed by the tool and by the situation that you're building. So you need to really start thinking about that as you're building and putting things together.
Okay, and for the last one that we're going to do is add good friction. And I'm borrowing this term good friction from a professor at MIT, Renee Richardson-Goslin, who talks about good friction in design and in AI systems. And the thought there is, in design, friction is often seen as a pain point. However, at critical points in the customer journey, human input or good friction can be very valuable. And so this is a way of being human first, essentially. How relevant is this for you? Just your score, Ajay?
So this is a little complex, so I'll have to perhaps start off with the score, maybe of 4 or so.
Okay, let's do that. Let's start with the score. I'll get the other scores, and I promise I'll come right back to you. Okay, Nayal, what's your score?
I was going to say 4 as well.
Lynn?
5 with an asterisk.
Love it. Abizer?
4.
4. The asterisk guarantees that I will come back to you. So Ajay, tell me a little bit about your thoughts, and then we'll go to Lynn.
So it's a little complex because you have to sort of take a look at the context of this, right? So if you start to take a look at adding good friction, it's typically when you want the user to avoid doing a activity that could either be harmful to the individual or to the firm, right? So somebody's decided to quit their insurance itself, and I don't want an insurance anymore. Should I put in some friction at that point in time to say, well, think about it for a day or so and then come back? Well, in that context, it's definitely good friction. I feel I'm getting fleeced by my bank and I want to look at refinancing my mortgage. Well, is it good? Is it bad at that point in time, right? So it's sort of a point from whose perspective are you looking at the friction? Is it so? And what is the potential for it to be misused? So if you look at it purely with a positive lens, it could, in certain cases, be a fairly valuable tool to nudge individuals to take on a ideal path, right? So when you want them to act in a particular manner, so it could be pretty valuable there.
Thank you. Lynn, 5 with an asterisk, tell us more.
In too many designs, I believe we are sort of outsourcing to the user the checks that need to be put in place. I would say, so we're saying, okay, we're going to auto-generate this text, but doctor, clinician, you have to read it first before it goes out to make sure it's right. The most extreme is self-driving cars. We're going to give you or sell you full automation for your car, but you're supposed to have your hands on the wheel. Well, as human beings, it's pretty much impossible to keep up the level of thoughtfulness required if the system is performing well 99, 97%. It's not the way human perception works. Human beings, we're not good at that. So we're inevitably going to become lazy and going to miss what we need to do. So I view the user needs to check this as a design crutch rather than a really functional way to say, yeah, it needs to be checked for accuracy, but we can't just slough it off on the user.
Love that. I'm curious, what are you guys most proud of as you lead initiatives or think about piloting initiatives focused on AI in your respective customer journeys?
I can go, and this is a little bit outside of the stuff I directly touch. I dialed in late to a Teams meeting, and the co-pilot said, "Would you like a summary of what's happened so far?" I went, yes.
Yes, please.
And it was really good, right? The degree to which those tools are improving just in very rapid. Now, at the end of the call, the summary is what, an executive secretary would have taken for notes, right? It knows who everybody is. It knows what they said. It knows what was agreed to. Perfect? No, but really freaking amazing. And the degree to which it takes out the rote, the boring tasks is quite amazing.
Love that. Abizar, what are you most proud of as you think about these work streams and what you've been able to touch?
I think it goes back to the, I go to my name of captain outcome is really the ability to improve health outcomes, right? So it's the role that folks in my field are trying to do, giving them more tools and giving them more ammunition, allowing them to do it deeper. Again, whether it's develop that new medicine therapeutic, how can you do it faster, better, more efficiently, more ethically, whether it's providing care, how can you now go back to that, the all-encompassing vision of precision care, where at a 30 day, how do we more rapidly get to a 10 if 10 is now. Really enabling that journey to be more effective and more efficient.
Nayal, what are you most proud of?
I think of understanding where we know we can drive more value for our consumers and our customers, and that specifically being getting to what Abiza said earlier around personalization and really being able to be a better partner and a better, service-led brand and company for them. But I'm most excited about what I can do for my teams and for those I work with, and being able to free up time to give them more opportunity to think big, to innovate, and to focus on the work that gets them excited every day, and give them some time back from the monotonous, the tedious tasks that do, they provide value and they have to get done, but having a tool that can collaborate with them to get there and free up some of the time, I think is what I'm most excited about.
Ajay, what are you most proud of?
Very similar to that. So a large part of what I do is sort of help teams internally, right? And to have someone from another part of the world tell me, well, I went into this experience and I wasn't feeling very confident, but with the process that we put together, I could achieve more than what I thought I would be able to. That is very rewarding for me. The fact that we've been able to remove a barrier, to make things a little easier for them so that they can go home a little earlier is wonderful. It feels great.
We all want to go home a little earlier, so definitely. And so as the last question, I know we only have a couple minutes. It is Black History Month, so I'd love to ask a question to spark a little more conversation around ethics and inclusive AI development. And so the question is, how can we leverage Gen AI to authentically and sensitively either amplify the Black experience, Black culture, Black American history, or better help the Black community? Any thoughts there? It's a big question, I know.
There's some really interesting things coming with elementary and secondary education, and it's a long-term thing. But I think the best thing we could do for all people is actually making all of that elementary and secondary education highly effective for the individual student versus teaching to the average class. So if you've been looking at some stuff that Khan Academy is doing, I think there's some very exciting things on the horizon.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I would say for me, as a Black woman, I definitely have been very much paying attention to a lot of things around bias and how do we build the tools ethically. I've been paying a lot of attention to some of the work that Sinead Bovell has done in like understanding what's coming and what makes a lot of sense. I think for me, the opportunity to democratize access and democratize the ability to move things forward is a game changer in what can be accomplished by underrepresented groups, especially within the Black community. So the ability to take ideas and bring them to life faster, leveraging tech to do so without the access that they've been historically like excluded to, and that building now, I think is really exciting times.
Well, with that, it is 2:01. So I just want to thank you for your thoughtfulness, for your participation, honestly, for sharing your genius with us. This was a fantastic conversation. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed it. And Ellen, I will pass it back to you. Thank you.
Well, Janelle, I just want to echo the thanks to this wonderful group and the candid discussion that went on. I did see a bunch of questions come through. They will be replied to one-on-one with those who asked. Also, be on the lookout for a link to today's recorded presentation. It may not come for a couple of days, but you will receive it. And then in the meantime, we do have some handouts in the control panel for you to download and have a look at. So with that, have a wonderful day, everyone. That now concludes today's amazing webinar.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.